Hello, everybody. I am Dimitris, as you very well know, and I am joined by the amazing but chilly over there. I'm not good with directions. Who will be talking to us today about Drusatta? Is that the correct way of actually pronouncing it?
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah. And essentially, what he wants to get out of his amazing spotlight. For those that you don't know, and I think pretty much that Patsili will talk to us about that a bit more. Drusatta is a very long project. I mean, as far as I understand, you're developing it since you were 13 years old. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's been in. I've been working on it in some shape or form since I was about 10 or 11. So it's been about 20 years at this point, which is it's very weird to think about that it's been going for that long, but it's been in a lot of different iterations. It started out as a book idea, then it spiraled into I wanted to make my own RPG, then it was a campaign world, and it's gone from almost every single different iteration it possibly could.
But that should also mean that I mean, if it's an RPG game, because you are playing with players, right? You have several campaigns in the world.
Yes.
That means probably that it's moved from a system to another, because 13 years ago, 5th edition was not a thing, not even 4th edition was a thing 13 years ago, as far as I understand. What kind of system were you using to begin with?
So when I first started, it was just for a book idea. But then I first started getting to D&D in fourth edition.
Okay.
And fourth edition, from what I've realized, was very much based on almost like more of a video game. So I started creating my own version of a campaign world based in that system. Unfortunately, I never got a group together to play, so it kind of went on hold for a bit, and I kept reworking it into other systems. I actually had it reworked into a Star Wars role-playing system for a while.
Okay.
Yeah, that big switch.
That's
And
what I
then
call
now,
a hell of a pivot, effectively.
yeah, basically. I was also on a Star Wars role-playing forum, and that was the setting for a couple of my different stories. And then eventually, when fifth edition came out, and I finally found a lot of groups, I moved it over to fifth edition instead.
I see. Interesting. Very interesting, actually. Especially the pivot. I would like to talk to you about that, because I guess that what you did is you reused your ideas and morphed them into a different setting. But before we go into that, and you can give us more details about that, let's talk about the world itself. Drusatta, from what I can understand and from what I've read so far, has a long story. Like, you've written all the way from the beginning of the world in many ways, and then we had the big conflict with the gods and the fall of the gods and everything like that, and the war with the demons. Right? Is that how it goes? Am I?
Yes. So, when I first started making it into a full-on campaign setting, I knew I wanted to have a couple big events. I draw a lot of inspiration from the show Critical Role, which I've been watching for the past couple years, and seeing basically how well thought out everything is, how different events lead into another. And I even bought Matt Mercer's campaign guide, I think 2 years ago at this point, and I've been kind of using that as a guide myself to help me figure out how events are set up, how they lead into each other. And I've been a very big fan of Rick Riordan, who wrote the Percy Jackson books, and I love the idea of combining mythology into these stories and having the gods be so accessible and being so prevalent in the culture. So I came up with the idea for a pantheon of gods for one of the nations, and from there, I came up with the demon lords, kind of in the polar opposite, because that was the inspiration for them came from Out of the Abyss, which was a D&D fifth edition module, and I love mythology so much, and I love the idea of there's no real good or bad guy. A lot of it's just mistakes or misunderstandings.
Yeah.
So the idea of the creation of the world was basically there was the goddess of light and then the lord of darkness who fell in love because light and dark. And then through a misunderstanding, now there's this huge divine war between gods and demons. And I love that idea.
But were your demons actually? I mean, because you said it's not especially good and bad. Does this mean that your demons were not necessarily evil? I mean, were they just different way of understanding the world, or they were actually evil?
There are a couple who are just flat out evil. But one of the ones that I recently posted an article about him the other day, Yendir. was someone I've been kind of fiddling with for the past couple months. And the idea I had was he's this kind of undying lich, almost kind of like an orcish type people. If anybody knows the Orcus, the Lord of Undeath. And originally, my first draft of him, he was just full out evil lich, wanted to kill everything, wanted to just undead everywhere. But then I had an idea before of he was a good guy. He was a really powerful wizard who wanted to help out the world, but was terrified of his own death. So he was scrambling, grabbing at any thread, trying to stay alive to help his people. And unfortunately, he was tricked by one of the other demon lords, and now he is evil per se.
Is that Krazig or Krazig, the other demon lord that betrayed him?
Yes, exactly. They gave him the secret to eternal life, but as a kind of a caveat to that, they have complete control over him. So it's not so much that he's evil; he's been completely brainwashed, and he can't escape. Which, for some of my players in the campaign, that may come up. Maybe there's a way to free him of that. Maybe there's a way to banish the evil influence.
But this is way back, right? Your campaign is played in current time in your world, because this is actually like 2,500 years like before the...
Yes.
Yeah.
So the current year in the campaign that I'm running right now is it's at 1846 AGE, which is after the God's Exodus. And then this all takes place probably 1,000 years before the gods left. So it's been about maybe almost 3,000 years since that event's happened.
I see. Because essentially you had a very good conflict, very nice, well done conflict with the demons going up into power, and then a great schism occurring essentially on the gods, which was the essential downfall, right? I mean, that's how it works with it. Yeah. Right, so, I mean, you have a very rich history, and I see that your ancient nations, which are still hanging around, actually, they exist since then, right? Like both Arcalia and Sintar. Or Sintarin.
Yeah, Sintaran Empire.
Sintarin, yeah.
So, they exist from long ago, but they're not the same at all. They've changed, they've conquered, they've lost lands. And that's one of the big things that I really wanted to start to get feedback on is I've realized that a lot of my nations have been around since almost the beginning of the world, which I'm trying to make that more realistic where nations rise, nations fall. And I've been adding a bunch of smaller nations here and there that have popped up. Or
like the free cities you have in the middle, right? And you have, because now you have an empire in your map. Actually, I was looking at the map. It was very interesting because you have some really nice free cities as islands in the middle of the two empires. And you have the dwarves on the north. And on the south, you have dragonborn traders. Is that correct?
Yes.
That was a very interesting concept. Like the idea of dragonborn traders was actually like, that's interesting.
Yeah. So that concept actually came from. I haven't put a lot of work into that yet, but I've been working on that one kind of off stream and off camera. But the idea I had was I wanted sort of like a Morocco-ish nation, and I had this idea in my head of dragonborn most of them have fire breath. It's a desert area, it's sand, that they use their fire breath to create this very fine, intricate glass. And they can use this glass and sell it all across the world. And another thing I like to do is I like to try to take different cliche things, different tropes, and switch them a little bit. Because when you think of a dragonborn, a lot of the games I've played in, dragonborns have been these tribal warriors or just very aggressive people. And I loved the idea of, no, they're not very aggressive. They're merchants. And like, they're not going to attack you. They're going to undermine your economy and have a hostile takeover of your company. I think it's just such a fun idea.
So Dragonborn, essentially traders and businessmen.
Basically, yes.
That's really cool. So do you consider them essentially to be dressed like, almost like, you said Moroccan, so you dressed a bit more like North Africa kind of thing, like people from the Sahara or anything like that? Is that the kind of culture you expect them to get?
Yes, very, very much so.
Interesting.
Like I imagine a lot just like long flowing robes, a lot of very like blues, purples, reds, different kind of like colors like that. And another thing I did recently as well is I've taken a lot of the other races and put my own personal spin on them. And one of the ones I've done with Dragonborn is I split them into two camps. There's what I call the Drakin and the Drakon, where one of the races is, or what sub-races I should say, they're almost like walking newts. They're very skinny, they're very lithe.
Okay, yeah.
They're they're the more like the high merchants, like the traders, and the other ones are like the big bulbous like short nosed ones that they're the guards, they're the bodyguards, and they've more of the enforcers of the.
Okay, but they work together essentially. They are one society.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, they are one full society.
Interesting. As Ademal says, it puts a whole other spin to the idea of dragons coveting gold. Like, they're
Yes.
building their nice stash, but they're doing through merchant endeavors. Do they have actually ships? Are they like seafaring traders and merchants?
Oh yes. I haven't explained much of it on the world level yet, but they are actually one of the fiercest navies in the entire world, because they want to protect their ships. That their navy is amazing. And the crazy thing is, up north, the Middle Islands, which have the free cities, are pirates. So those two are always going against each other.
Interesting.
Where the free cities trade to everyone, and everyone trades with them except that one nation, because they know they're undermining their economy. So they want to try and get rid of the Middle Islands.
I found it very interesting, and I wanted to ask you about that because I saw that you have Arcalia on the west side of your map, and you have the Centaurian Empire on the west side of the map. And I was thinking, you know what? If those two are going with each other, everything in between is effectively either fodder or a wall that they have to. I mean, I was thinking that, you know what, there wouldn't be a smarter move for either of them than taking over one of these islands, because that would be essentially a way for them to pivot and attack the other side of the map. You know what I mean? Like the way that would have worked. And I was wondering how the dynamics works, and it makes sense now because if I don't know about how the small free cities end up doing it, but it's definite that Dragonborn have the wooden wall, as we say, essentially the navy to protect them from the shit hitting the fan left and right, effectively.
Yeah, basically, the southern province, the area where the Dragonborn live, they're basically the big brother of the world, since they're square in the middle. And there's times where the Arcalians and Centaurans want to fight each other, but with their navies, they tell them like, knock this off. Okay, we're doing trading.
It's bad for business.
Yeah, get out. And in terms of the Middle Island, the Arcalians and Centaurans are absolutely fighting each other over these islands. Not outright war, but like subversion, maybe trying to coerce different islands into joining their side.
I see.
One of the free cities was originally a Centauran camp.
Okay, so this is one of the places that was lost essentially by the Centaurian kingdom. I see.
So that when the Arcalians and Centaurans are fighting over these Middle Islands, one of them was like a Centauran fortress that when the Centaurans pulled back, these pirates moved in and they now control it.
Good idea. If you find a nice place to stay, you just lay your mat there and you say, now mine.
Pretty much.
Right, so we are effectively, when we're talking about Drusatta right now, at year 1426 AG, and we're just at the end of the Great Wars of Drusatta, right? I mean, we're at an age of peace right now. So I find it interesting because you said that you want to take a bit more from your spotlight and talk about how the nations can rise or fall or mutate through the ages. But I thought that an age of peace is always the hardest time to do that, because there is not much in terms of at least open conflict to be able to do that. So are you trying to essentially write back in your history now? Is that the idea? I mean, are you building from the ground? Yes. Okay. So
the idea I had was that the reason why this is currently a time of peace is because when my campaigns pick up, they're thrust into this world where this major war just ended and there's finally peace, but that war could break out again at any time.
So why did the war was over? Because sometimes wars need a good reason to over. I mean, was it a war exhaustion essentially? Like people couldn't handle it anymore?
Yes. The way I imagined it was the Arcalians and Centaurans would fight each other until everyone's wiped out. But the rest of the world was like, listen, we're being dragged into this, enough. And they kind of had this big peace accord, and the current leader of the Centauran Empire, who's known as the Cinta, kind of realized that their resources were running low, and they could just give in to their nation's hatred of the other, or realize like, let's relax, recuperate a bit. We can do this all again another time, or do it better. Undermine them instead of having full-on conflicts.
Okay, so they essentially turned from a fully militarized campaign to a more of an economic slash cultural
Yes.
war in a way. Interesting.
Yes.
So, in many ways, your world seems to be heading towards the way of more subversive and more like you see heroes becoming spies or becoming agents of one of the
Yes.
two. You call your world Drusatta, which is the empire that you seem to be focusing less in many ways, if I understand it correctly, or is that the case? Is not the case?
So the world itself is called Drusatta, which that's just the name of the plane of existence.
Uh huh.
And then there's four major nations. There is the Kingdom of Arcalia, the Dwarven Holds of Bulgrim, the Southern Provinces with the Dragonborn, and then there's the Centauran Empire. Within a lot of these areas, there are a couple other smaller factions. For instance, the Centauran Empire is on the continent of Sabrax, and the southern part of that is a loose collection of tribes called the False Scar tribes. And through the war, basically, many Centaurans want to control them, but many others realize like that's where we came from. Like that's our ancestral place. So they kind of leave them to themselves. So I have been focusing a lot on Arcalia and Sabrax, mostly because my current campaign that I run now is set in Arcalia, and I'm doing another one soon that's eventually going to be in this area. But I've kind of very slowly been adding things to both the Dwarvish Holds and the Southern Kingdoms as well.
I see. No, which is fair. I mean, sometimes things will jump because there will be connections and like histories that involve the other parts of the world. It makes sense.
Yes.
Admiral said something very interesting. Actually, he said that this sounds like a fantasy Cold War, which makes me think perhaps you can draw a bit more of inspiration from the Cold War, like to see the world in the eyes of somebody living during the 50s and 60s in the US or in the USSR essentially, and what kind of changes that made to the population. That we had like even people being considered to be spies, like all this like weird cultural mix that is actually happening, and the consideration of the rest of the world of where does this leave us and what happens if like people started to fight again, kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's something I know someone had mentioned that in the spotlight section of the Discord as well, and I definitely thought of the idea, and I love the idea, but I love the idea of what you're saying before about now analyzing it from the common person's point of view, as well as maybe now instead of them having these major armies, they're having their own arms race of a sort where they're trying to find like magical artifacts, or they're trying to research powerful spells that can do some more damage instead of just sending a full army in, and
essentially finding the bomb or
basically.
Interesting.
And the idea I had for the second campaign I'm running, where they're based on the Centauran Empire, it's going to be a lot more political intrigue, where there's different people vying for control of the empire, or different people trying to get as much power as they can to like overthrow different people, or possibly just further their own ends, basically.
Yeah.
So I definitely love the idea of making like a fantasy Cold War.
It's an interesting idea actually, because having said that, you said that you want to build a bit more intrigue within the nations as well, because they seem so ancient and so big and so old effectively, and like standing forever. But I would say that you can think also, and it would be an interesting mix from my side as well, to think of them as also the Roman Empire and the reason that the Roman Empire starts to fall, because you are at a point like that, right? The Roman Empire didn't just start to fall by itself. It is what we call, I don't know if you've heard the term a systems collapse, like the Bronze Age collapse, but it was kickstarted by probably some sort of a war, and you just finished that war. So it's very interesting because you're in a very nice place there that you can start thinking about, maybe the factions within the countries themselves have to get much stronger. If the king strained relationships to keep the war going, if the king asked for much more from some of the barons and lords and dukes, whatever, they might start vying for power. They might want independence, for example. There might be other interests that they might start going in the way. Think about the fact that, for example, if you have traders, they will try to push for more influence, to lower prices, to get access to resources they didn't have access to. So this can be a good way of actually saying, we're going to give you some money, but you go for independence, so we can actually undermine the power of X, Y, Z kind of thing. It's an interesting place you are there. A very interesting place. I mean, I wasn't thinking about it in the beginning when you said peace, but now we're thinking about Cold War. Sounds a bit more, it has a bit more meat in it, kind of thing. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I know. Right now in the Kingdom of Arcalia, where the campaign is currently set, there's 4 major baronies, and the campaign is currently set in the northernmost one. But without giving too much away, one of the barons or the baroness is an elf. All the other ones are human, so she's not trusted very much. And I've already kind of worked in a little bit that she's might have her own plans. And kind of going off your suggestion there, I think that might actually play in a little bit. Like she has her own plans and maybe has backing from other people. Who knows?
Interesting. That is very interesting. Adam, I'll just ask, is there magical automation or industrialization in your world? I mean, what kind of a stage are you right now in terms of that?
Yes, there is. In my world, there are obviously automatons do exist. One of my players is an artificer who has basically a magic cannon. Like he calls it Stormbreaker. It's a magically infused rifle. So rifles exist, flintlock rifles exist, and most of it, I feel like I have to use this trope, but most of the industrialization comes from the dwarves. Although the one major difference is in Bulgrim, which is the continent where the dwarves come from, there is a very rare mineral they call it rune ore, and they mine it to make these rune stones.
Oh, this is the war, right? You've had a war with the dwarves at some point about 2 different clans of orcs fighting against for these mines.
Yes. On the Bulgrimese continent, there are the dwarvish holds, and then there's a place called the Northern Clans, which are basically a combination of Native American tribes and Game of Thrones wildlings.
Okay.
And rune ore is heavily sought after throughout the entire world because of its innate magical properties. So these clans are fighting with these different holds, trying to take over different mines. And I've actually run a couple one-shots that have been during that conflict, where the heroes are trying to push back the clans from one of the mines. And basically they harness this ore, and they can imbue it into weapons, into buildings, into armor, and it gives extra strength to it. And basically, this is what makes the flintlock rifles turn into the magical rifles by having the runestones embedded.
So they're infused essentially with this magical element effective that makes them stronger, I guess, and more powerful than used to be.
Yes.
Interesting. So you could consider that this rune ore can maybe the next innovation, for example, is harnessing it for energy, like becoming your uranium of your world or something like that.
That is a fantastic idea.
That can be the thing that they're trying to research. Like this is the arms race here. Who's gonna be able to find a more industrial way of using that ore? Because if you say flintlock, you are in the equivalence of what we would say like 1700s. So you're just at the edge of the beginning of manufacturing. Like you see mills coming up into play. You see the first way of actually using power of the water to move more things than just mills for grain. In the 1700s in our world, essentially you saw the first smithies that used water power to be able to move components and to have like hydraulic hammers, that actually allow them to have like better construction of weapons and things like that. So you might be at this point in your world. It's not like a steampunk or anything, not even close to that, but it's just fantasy at the edge of industrialization kind of thing with a mix of magic, which sounds quite freaking unique, I have to say, like as an idea.
I know. One of the things that I would really hope to get more feedback on, especially from those of you who may be better versed in this than I am, is I want to try to work in magic into that. Because I know I'm a history teacher, so I know a little bit about Industrial Revolution, things like that, but I would love to think about the Industrial Revolution if magic existed. So like instead of building a blast furnace, you have incredibly powerful fireball spell or something like that. So I think in my spotlight, I would love to get feedback on stuff like that, where using the magic and the industrialization together.
That is very interesting. Actually, funny enough, I have an article for you that Janet wrote some time ago which is called. Let me find it. I was looking for it right now. Where is it, Janet? Where did you put it? Here, yeah, the porcelain argument: how to be existence of magic affect technological advancement. Which I will paste on the link as well, on the chat as well, for people to see it. So yeah, it's interesting actually, because the truth of the truth is that the difficult part for me with magic and industrialization is the fact that people tend to think of magic as just an overlay. You know, like, this is the world, the history goes as it would normally go. Oh, and there is magic by the way as well. But this is not the case. The very existence of magic changes the way that things will grow and the way that things will become, even at the very beginning. Like, the whole idea behind the porcelain argument that Janet wrote is that one of the reasons that China was so far back when it comes to chemistry, it was because they discovered porcelain, which is amazing as a discovery, but it's reactive, which means they never had glass, which means they couldn't actually had stable reactions on their chemistry. They couldn't understand. I mean, it's mind-blowing, but it is the point. Like, imagine now, like, something so simple made such a huge difference for China. We're talking about like almost quarter of the world back then. How magic would have affected that? How the proliferation of magic would have affected the whole world? I mean, why do you need, for example, a nard, or why do you need a way to grow and fertilize your harvest if you have druids? Right?
Yeah.
I mean, and how do you pay them? Do you pay them in favor? Do you pay them in percentage of your? I mean, it's a completely different economy, and it will change the way things work. And I like the idea of what you said about the, how is it called, the rune ore?
Yeah, the rune ore.
Rune. Oh, it's called rune ore. Okay, good. So, very simple. I like that. Because essentially that can be kind of a way to stop this crazy thing of saying, you know what, there is magic and everything is magical. Rune ore might actually impose some boundaries that makes it interesting. To say, you know what, that you cannot have a proliferation ad infinitum and forever, because you need to have this ore. I mean, this ore, for example, might be the way to go above a specific level of magic, or above a specific strength in magic, or time, for example, in magic, you know, something like that. I mean, that would be your world. It's not for me to say.
Yeah, the idea I had for it was something along the lines of, it's something that either amplifies the power, or it's something that it allows you to kind of shape the magic a little bit. Almost like a meta magic from a sorcerer.
Yeah, like a transmutation, kind of like take the magic and actually refine it, or make it more workable in apart from the normal spells, effectively, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Interesting. Right, so talk to us a bit more specific about what you'd like to see people asking you during the next days of the Spotlight.
Well, the one big thing I would love to get more feedback on, again, as I mentioned before, is the different nations and the different relations back and forth. And a lot of things I've been working on, I feel like I've been giving a very general idea of them. Like, I post my articles, and I've been reading a lot of the other articles, which, by the way, everyone in the community has just amazing work. And I feel like there's just things I'm missing. It's kind of weird, because I'm not sure what it is. I just know there's something I'm not seeing. And I love giving it to the people to look at, because they can see those things that I might miss, whether it's, well, why is this person doing that? Or where did this person come from? Or why is this nation like that? And it kind of gives me, the more questions they ask, the more it makes me think about, oh, I've never thought of that. Like, for instance, the Cold War, and you were saying about how the common people are becoming more spies instead of actual outright heroes. Like, I never thought of that. And now that gives me something to kind of inspiration to write about.
Good, I'm glad I could help. Right, guys, I think that we're approaching, actually we've passed the 30 minutes, and I know that you have a special someone that probably will kill you if you're late. So if you have any questions, let us know here very quickly. Drusatta is a very well designed world, I have to say that. I mean, if you see the structure of the table of contents, it's a very well organized world, so it will be very easy for you to start essentially reading through it. Is there any idea? I mean, I know that you have an introduction article, right? I mean, I've seen something like that, like a start here kind of article. Do you?
I have the introduction at the very top.
Yeah.
And I think the best place to start would probably be the Kingdom of Arcalia, mostly because that's the one location that I probably put the most work into as of right now. And it kind of goes from there because from there you learn about the gods, the demon lords, the relationship with the Centauran Empire, and it kind of spirals out from there.
Good. So that will be the beginning of everybody to start essentially going into your world and asking questions for it.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Is there anything you want to say as we close the spotlight? The other spotlight, the introduction to spotlight.
Stop the spotlight.
Wow.
Yeah, just like I said, I'm looking forward to any feedback, guys. Really, truly, I appreciate it all, and I look forward to hearing from you guys.
Great. Mr. Bacilli, it was an honor to have you here. Thank you very much, and it was really nice to talk to you. I really like Drusatta. I've told you that before, and I kind of like keep an eye always on what's happening there. I think actually Kingdom of Arcalia is the one that you've actually put for the Rise to Power competition, right?
Yes, it was.
Yeah,
yes.
I remember saying that. Guys, thank you very much for being here. Have a look through the Spotlight as it is right now. I will be putting this video as well to the Spotlight, so you can check it out again for whoever was not here to see it. Be active, talk to this amazing guy, and we'll talk soon. Thank you very much, dude.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, guys.
Bye, guys.